So as we practice, as practitioners, we learn to surf and ride on those waves which are the most turbulent. A yogi's practice takes them to the stage where not only are they no longer bound by those turbulent waves of emotions and feelings, they actually seek them, they look for them. They look to create positions where the churn can happen so that everybody's darkness comes up and yet a group of people can actually contain it and hold it. And as practitioners, we're going to find ourselves falling into this opportunity more and more on a surprisingly frequent basis. It's happening everywhere. And what do we do about this? Two things that I wanted to share. One was that we have to practice more. Okay. We have to practice in order to be able to serve. You've been in the company of incredible teachers of Vedanta who share with us the knowledge and the understanding that our experience as incarnate human beings is actually not what it seems to be. The word illusion and maya are slightly different. And what is illusion is when something appears to be something that it is not. And so our identity as an individual little flesh, body, mind, melange, sort of mix of all these things, that's a flawed understanding. And if you move from that understanding, we move to the understanding that actually somewhere in our early years, when we opened our eyes, we took a left turn instead of taking a right turn. We have to get back to that right turn position. And when you can get back to that position, the understanding dawns that we are not this. When we know we're not this and we're not this, we find we're this, then we're in a position to be able to take somebody else into that place. We're in a position to hold somebody else's hand as they are navigating this or they're navigating this. At that time, we can hold the poison. At that time, we can surround a situation with a compassionate strength which is necessary for that poison to be held and for the nectar that will always come to flow from it. Now, who here does pranayama practices? Okay, so everybody is safe. There is nobody here. I don't know who you are, so I don't know the degrees of safety that I can, the boundaries of safety that I can push. But I'd remind all of you that you have an incredible central nervous system, and the purpose of that central nervous system is to guide you and remind you of when you're pushing your own boundaries. So please pay attention to it. All right? If you don't feel comfortable, don't do it. And persons who are here in loco parentis and who are carrying future yogis, please don't do this practice. Okay? So I'm going to do a little practice with you, which I found to be quite stabilizing and energizing, and everybody can do this unless you have an infant on board. So assuming that you're all safe, the lungs. All of the practices that I'm going to do this afternoon are to do with the lungs and expanding the lungs and rebalancing the way in which we breathe. So everyone looks quite fit. Everyone looks as though they've had a good lunch as well, and that should have been digested by now. So if you'd like to just stand up on your mats, let's awaken some of these heads that are getting very, very intellectually active. So let your hands dangle down by the side of your hips. Let the weight descend into your hands, so it's loose arms, loose shoulders. Just feet shoulder width apart and parallel, please, as though you're standing on tram lines, knees slightly bent. Now, if everyone is comfortable doing breathing practices, I shouldn't have to explain too hard and for too long. You should pick it up quite quickly. All we're going to do is expand this infrastructure here, the ribs, sternum, the shoulders. And we're going to use the arms as levers. So all that happens is that when the arms come up, that whole superstructure moves up and outwards. And we breathe in. When the arms come down, we let the weight of the hands bring the arms down, and we breathe out. Please just show me the movement in action. Just go ahead and do that. Both arms together. Away you go, in your own time. No breathing, just normal, just the movement, and down. Heavy hands. Heavy hands. The key is heavy hands. Then your arms will work like levers. Okay, so brilliant, excellent. Everyone's got control of their arms, that's good to see. The key to this is that we inhale to 3 and we exhale to 2, which is quite unusual in terms of yoga breathing, but it really rejuvenates and charges the body up ever so quickly. So all you're going to do is mentally count 1 Om, 2 Om, 3 Om on an upswing, and then 2 counts on the way down. So it's 1, 2, 3, and then away you go in your own time. 10 rounds, please. What on earth did you guys have for lunch? Okay, those of you who are teachers, put your back in it. Sorry. Well, those of you who are teachers, let's get just a little bit more vigorous. So it's the Midlander in me, you can tell, can't you, definitely? So all we're going to do is tummy's tucked in. Loose arms. Remember, we're bringing the chest up and out. Very good. So everybody do a count of 5 more, please. And relax. Anybody feeling dizzy? Yeah? Okay, just reversing the breathing pattern has a remarkable impact on the way in which oxygen and branchiectasis is distributed in the body. And you're only exhaling to 2. So with each exhalation, what's happening? Not all the breath is leaving the body. And so the cumulative effect is that you get an accumulation of oxygen building up very, very rapidly, and so you feel really high. And your cheeks start to shine. Thank you. That's it for the moment. Just back on your seats. I'll do the sequence with a few minutes of talking in between. Is everybody okay? Nobody too dizzy? If you do this to a count of about 50, what will happen is you'll lose control of your lips. You get tingling sensations in your lips, and your face starts to feel quite strange. Don't drink any water if you want to have a go for that. Good. Okay, so as yoga practitioners here in the UK, we are at that stage where the UK community is maturing. Wave 1, which was asana, and getting fit and becoming completely entranced by these incredible bodies that we have, and getting bodily incarnate and entranced, imprisoned almost in the incredible sensations that you then feel in the early stages. We've had a lot of that. We've had a lot of people who've set up schools on the basis of asana as well. Remember, the olden teaching used to be that if somebody went to a guru as a spiritual aspirant and said, please take me under your wing, teach me the secrets of the universe and being and everything else, and the guru in his wisdom determined that this person wasn't yet ready for a spiritual path, they would say, go and do asana practice. So they would say, go and do asana for a couple of lifetimes. Well, not quite lifetimes, but go and do asana practice, because asana practice stabilizes you. It helps you get settled and fit for a normal human existence. In many traditions, they will not take students on unless they've been through the normal challenges of life. My wife often says that the hardest yoga practice she's ever done is being married. And those are also part of practice. But when maturity starts to happen, we start to move away from the physicality of it. And when that happens, you have to dismantle the complete structures which have been established on building a physicality-only yoga culture. So we're seeing that happening right now. There are lots of schools where what was promised hasn't actually been delivered. People have become fit, but there is still a propensity to become depressed, to become fearful. All of the psychological aspects are still very much challenged to be dealt with. And that's where we are at this moment in time. In this country, we have an incredible tradition of dynamic, challenging, of all regimens. The British have been known to go out and do the most crazy things and then come back with some of the most incredible rewards. It's part of the way we do things over here. But there is a casualty, and that casualty can be that the disturbance that happens can often be too much and can't be managed. We're now coming out of that stage where everybody was just doing whatever they wanted to do. And we'll see, I feel, within the next 2 or 3 years, all of the major institutions, the yoga traditions, starting to settle down and actually become mature enough to talk to each other. So we hope that the Iyengars and the Ashtangas and the more committed lineages, which are very, very, they have a very strong identity, they're also going to start to be able to talk and start to share some of their practices and their support with each other. Yoga wars, hopefully, will be a thing of the past without too many casualties. The biggest challenge that we're going to face, though, is that as practitioners, we have invited the universe to teach us. We have said to the universe, I want to walk this path. We've put our heads above the parapet and said, yes, we want to be spiritual practitioners, and the universe is desperate for people who are going to come up and say, this is what we want to do. But it teaches in its own way. And the manner in which it starts to teach accelerates into giving you challenges that you need to step up to be able to meet. Not necessarily challenges that we are going to very comfortably be able to meet and then go home and be very happy and very spiritual and everything else. Sometimes the challenges require really dirty, dark, internal work to be done. And if we don't do it ourselves, and we still say, yes, we're spiritual practitioners, the invitation gets stronger and stronger until you do confront it. And one of my teachers used to say, whatever you don't meet inside, you will meet outside. So why don't meet it inside? It'll be a lot easier to cope with. So we're going to see more and more of this happening. We desperately need more yoga practitioners in this country. We desperately need more yoga students in this country. But we need students first and teachers second. We have had the wave of teachers, and it's great, but now we need to build quality in depth. So we need lots and lots more students. There is some fantastic work which is being done in schools. Charlotte, I was chatting with earlier on, she's taking yoga into schools, which is probably one of the most important things that I see in this country. But we do need to do that. And I'm sorry, who was the youngest teachers here? Less than 5 years? Okay, so a fair number. The tradition in which I was initiated, I was taught that, by a story, I was taught that in a tiny little Indian village, a boy appears outside of a temple, and the temple is filled with all these learned pundits and people of that ilk. And this little boy sits very close to the temple and just sits quietly and meditates. And after a period of time, a glow appears and people begin to gravitate towards him. They approach him for advice and guidance, and he starts to encourage and give people support. Now the pundits are getting a little bit upset about what's going on here. You know, we're long serving, we've got big beards and everything else, and no disrespect to anybody who's got beards. You see, there I am, self-censoring again. Of course I wouldn't insult anybody who had a beard. But the pundits, they start to become quite concerned, and they turn to a very elderly teacher in the village, and the teacher says, let me take you on a journey. Arrive here early in the morning before dawn, and I want to show you something. So they all arrive in the misty morning down to the side of the river, and he sits them in a boat and sets off. So all these pundits, early morning in a boat, completely fog-bound, and they emerge on the other side, and he takes his coterie of pundits for a little walk, and in the distance they see a range of white mountains. And he asks them, he says, do you know what that is? And they say, no, no, no. So they go up a little bit closer, and they see that what they thought were white mountains are actually piles of bones. So there's a mountain range of bones. And he says, these are the bones of the lifetimes that that boy has been practicing. Okay? In his last lifetime, he had a tiny bit left to do, and so he has come back and has now finished his practice. So the time frames that we're working with are slightly longer than perhaps we're accustomed to at this moment in this country, but that's changing as well. So those who are new teachers, please bear in mind that there's a long way to go, and what will carry you through is that you don't teach beyond your ability. That's an absolute must, an absolute sacrosanct. This tradition is a tradition which comes with caveats. In all of the Shastras there are very strong warnings right at the beginning, and the warning to be true and to have integrity in what you do is the basis upon which our practices will evolve and develop. So those of us who are more seasoned teachers will probably smile and recognize some of the challenges that happen if you don't pace yourself and don't comfortably work within your own limits and boundaries. So as practitioners, we're going to need to have more and more integrity. We're going to need to be able to prove that we can do what we're actually teaching. So I'm going to put a challenge out there. We have pranayama practitioners here. If somebody were to say to you, okay, prove to me that you've got some degree of ability in pranayama, how would you do it? How would you establish that?
Pranayama is a term. It's experience. Well, how do you externally demonstrate that experience?
Excellent, thank you. I couldn't have put it better myself. Yes, that's precisely my question. So if somebody were to say, pranayama is something that you're teaching, can you please help me accept that you have a degree of mastery in it? Perhaps we need to have some way in which that can be done. I know that in some traditions they're quite robust in demanding demonstrations prior to then being accepted amongst your peers. In one of the traditions that I spent a good bit of time with, they were aggressive. They'd throw you out of their tent if you couldn't. If you had the temerity to claim that you were a teacher, they would quite literally throw you out of the tent if you couldn't stand your ground and demonstrate it. But that's how things are done in India. You can't do that over here because there's health and safety and all sorts of other constraints. But there is going to be a need for teachers to make sure they stay within their limits. Otherwise, the repercussions can be quite difficult, both for the student and for them. But also there's going to be a need for teachers who can actually genuinely practice and prove that they can practice, to step up and start to establish standards. Because if we don't do it ourselves, standards are going to be imposed by bureaucrats and people who genuinely are not connected with the tradition, people who are not practitioners. We've seen this. There was an attempt made 2 years ago to do this, and the yoga community came together really well to see that attempt off and make sure that it didn't happen. But we're in that churn, we're in that time when so much more of this is going to happen. So brush up your practice and make sure that you spend as much time, if not more time, on the mat in your own practice than you do teaching. If you're teaching more than you're practicing, that's always an alarm bell, something to worry about. I was at one stage where I had over 100 students and I used to teach. And then in a moment of inspiration, a voice came to me saying that no matter how many people who you fix or you think you fix, I'm going to give birth to 100,000 more who will be suffering, and you're not going to fix them all. It's not your job. Your job is not, as a priority, to try and do this. So it's a salutary lesson. And if we don't learn that intelligently, we learn it through exhaustion. There are always more and more people, and that's not our main role. Our main role is as practitioners to deepen our practice. And the more you deepen your practice, the more you can actually then genuinely contribute. It's really seductive to have 100 students all sitting there gazing at your every word, but it's pointless. In fact, it's detrimental both to them and to yourselves. So make sure your practice is absolutely solid. Right, everyone's comfortable. You're getting a bit agitated by some of the things I'm saying. So the next part of the churn. Same practice that we did a moment ago. Breathing practice was 1, 2, 3, breathing in, 5, 6, breathing out. So it's 2 seconds out, 3 seconds in, but this time we're going to do it seated. And this loosens up the same superstructure that I was referring to, the ribs and the breathing centers. Imagine you have glue on the heels of the palms of the hand here, and place them on the chest, and imagine that glue is holding those hands in place, so there's a bit of an overlap. Now, when you breathe in, what I want is for the upper part of the chest to expand, the abdomen stays nicely comfortably still. Imagine there is a hook with a rope at 45 degrees here, and when you come up, your hands will slide. So you go. So remember the adhesive. So I don't want to be seeing this. Okay? It's just a gentle movement, focusing on that rib cage. We want to expand the upper part of the lungs and then let it relax. So in your own time, remember, we're counting 1, 2, 3 breathing in, 2 seconds breathing out, like this. So 15 rounds. Keep your attention on the sternum. Remember I said the sternum is moving up and out at 45 degrees, coming up. The most important part is 3 seconds in, 2 seconds out. When you've done your 15, place your palms onto your thighs and just relax for a moment. Allow your body to settle. And slowly allow your eyes to open. A little lightheaded. Not worryingly so. If you feel a sense of panic, that does happen from time to time. If you were all Indian students, I'd be saying, do another 10. But you're not, so I'm saying relax and just settle comfortably into that space. So, that lightheadedness is because your brain is receiving more oxygen than it's used to. And when you think this thing is so important to how we're feeling and how we're thinking, this little selection of practices, they're not designed to make you all yoga teachers, they're not designed to make you all sannyasis or swamis or enlightened people, but they're designed to give you the capacity to do your practice. So you can build yourself up very quickly, recover very quickly, get rid of fatigue very quickly. These are very, very powerful practices for that. And you don't do more than 5 minutes in total. Okay? Good. So, we were talking about the quality of teachers and what we're going to need here in this country. There is a dimension which we are brought up with in the Indian tradition, which focuses on the yamas and the niyamas. The yamas and the niyamas are foundational, because what they do is help erode that barrier that we have, that there's me and there's that out there, and the two are separate. As practitioners, we will get to the stage where we comfortably acknowledge that we are part of a whole. We're a seamless part of a whole. And what happens then is a sense of indebtedness and gratitude starts to emerge, because what you've seen as out there has contributed to your realization that, wow, this is what I really am. If that out there didn't seem as though it was out there with all of its troubles and its problems and everything else, we wouldn't come to that realization. And so that debt becomes very, very present in your awareness. That, hang on, that incredible creation out there has given me this sense of inner tranquility and unity with everything that exists. So what am I now required to do in order to preserve that? The message at the end of the Gita, all those 700 verses, 18 chapters, the most incredible philosophy and also the most incredible demonstrations Krishnji demonstrated to Arjuna, this is who I am. All of that led to one understanding, and that understanding was, how do I then serve what's out there? And as yoga practitioners, we have a duty and a responsibility to serve what is out there. And we have it more so than Joe Blogs on the street corner, because they don't know. But as practitioners, we are called to do that. And it's really important, because if we have taken advantage of all of that creation, the body, the society that has given us the understanding, the teachers who have incredibly shared what they have learnt as the fruits of all their practice, we have a debt to preserve that so others can. And if you accept that reincarnation is a fact, and for us it is a fact, it's an experiential fact, but if you accept it even as a possibility in the theory, here's a selfish reason. If you're going to come back, what sort of a world do you want to come back into? Very, very practical and very, very necessary. This obligation that we have becomes more of a responsibility to us. And how can we settle and serve this obligation more? Back on our mats. Make sure that you do as much practice as you do teaching. Our practice is really called for. That obligation is going to be really, really critical. At the end of the Gita, does anybody remember the question that Arjuna asks? Arjuna says to Krishnaji, "Thank you. I now believe you that you're God and that you are in all things and you are everything. It was wonderful, but please put it all back in the bottle. I can't cope with it." And then he says, "But what do you want me to do?" So even at that point, when he knows everything, his question is still, what do you want me to do? And the answer that he's given is, yata ichchasi tatha kuru. Whatever your willpower is driving you to do, whatever you are being willed to do, go and do that. And so there's an incredible understanding that when you get rid of all of the mind fog and all of the thoughts and the chatter and the fears and everything else, each of us has within us an automatic guidance system, a compass, which says, when I do this, I genuinely feel fulfilled. And for every single person, it's different. For Arjuna, he was the warrior, and he had to be reminded that what would fulfill him, what his inner construction was, what his purpose was to act in that manner, without all of the thoughts and the worries and the fears and everything else. It was to be completely natural. That was his purpose. And it took all of that conversation to get him back to that stage, which was, do what your inner calling guides you to do. In yoga, we teach people that there are 4 stages that every personality will go through. And the first stage is people who don't know their purpose, but they don't know that they don't know. So these are the passionate guys who are out there competing, making their multi-million-dollar empires. They don't really know why they exist, but they don't know that they don't know. So they're driven by all of the base human instincts, animal instincts. Accumulate, compete, defeat, become successful, dominate. All of those things are drivers of a person who doesn't know their purpose. The purpose for which 65 million years of evolution have gone into bring into existence this incredible being. It certainly isn't to become CEO of Forbes 500 or anything like that. The next stage is that they don't know their purpose, but they know that they don't know their purpose. And that's normally people who have tried everything else, got exhausted, got depressed, midlife crisis. Damn, there's got to be something more than this. Or if you're Ramji, in the middle of the throne room. I've seen everything else. I've had all of the sweets, and I don't like the dancing girls or anything else anymore. What else is there? So that's a person who doesn't know their purpose, but now knows that they don't know their purpose. The next step is actually a really great one, and that's those people who don't know their purpose. Sorry, it's people who know their purpose but don't know their purpose. And that's where we're all born. As children, we live in a very harmonious manner. We don't know why we want to embrace each other. We don't know why we play and it makes us laugh. We don't know why that when we throw a ball and a dog brings it back to us, we find it really humorous and funny. But it's natural, it's completely natural, without knowing that it's natural. And that stage is really, really important, and that's where all of us are born into that stage. This is what our teachings say. And the final stage is when you know your purpose and you know that you know your purpose. And that's the time when nothing can shake you, when nothing can bring you down to those other levels. We're in a country and a civilization at a time when the default mechanisms take a child who's born knowing their purpose but not knowing that they know, i.e. natural, a humanist, a loving, compassionate creature, and our education brings them down to the next level and then down to the lowest level. By the 20s, we're all operating at that lowest level. We've forgotten the purpose, we've lost connection with all of our instincts, but we're driven by the conditioning that we've been given. And then the journey upward starts again. And the journey of yoga is the journey which takes you from that lowest level, filling in all of the gaps, healing everything, until you get back to that stage where not only do you know your purpose, but you know what your purpose is. There's a lovely poem about, it's a British poem written at the time of, written by a poet, I think, in India, in the colonies, The Centipede's Dilemma. I learnt it a long time ago at school, and it used to be it's about a centipede who's having a great time walking along until a toad comes along and says, how on earth do you manage to put one foot in front of the other so smoothly? And the centipede starts thinking about it, and all of a sudden it can no longer walk, and it lies there in the ditch trying to piece it all together again. And it's such a powerful and deeply, the person who wrote it, I thought, must have had a moment of inspiration of what the human condition is. Because that is what often happens to us when we've received all the ideas and people saying, this is how you put one foot in front of the other, and we try to think through everything, all of a sudden we lose that level 3 connection of knowing who we are, being driven by our deeper purpose, and fulfilling it and feeling fulfilled. So Arjuna at the end is told, right now I've told you what your purpose is. You're trained for it, you are connected for it, you don't need to think, you just need to go and articulate and deliver that purpose. We're moving into that stage. As practitioners, it'd be great to know what it is we're moving towards. Who joined yoga, their yoga journey? For who did it start with the intention of being tranquil, being enlightened, or any of those things?
Not those things, but we had
Questions? Anybody else? Anybody with mighty aspirations?
Well, yeah, and the Siddhis and things.
The Siddhis. Great. Yeah. That's very much a lure for the Kshatriya types. He says, speaking as a Kshatriya. But who joined in because of pain and suffering, either their own or seeing somebody else's? And that's feedback from the system, which is saying you are not living according to your purpose. You are not living according to your swadharma, the role that you have to play in all of this creation. That's how we feel it, and it comes back to us in that manner. In our tradition, we say there are 4 types of people. We're all very heady people. We have 4 of this, 3 of that, 2 of that. It's all nice and structured, so that even the biggest head can sort of settle down one day or other. But we have four types. We have the courageous ones, we have the intellectual ones, we have the cunning ones, and then we have the simple folk who just want a nice, easy journey through life. But for each of them, there's a different practice, and each of them has a different purpose. I often have a conversation with some of our swamis and sadhus and people like that. So the ISKCON guys are really great fun for this. And I always ask them, what do you teach a kshatriya? Somebody who's born to bring order back into things, somebody who's born to churn things, somebody who's born to try and help the order heal. What do you teach them? Is it the same mantra? Is it the same practices? And he says, we have a tradition whereby gurus are the ones who can look at somebody and say, actually, for this person of your constitution, this is something you should try. Because if you get a person who doesn't know his purpose and doesn't know he doesn't know his purpose, and you're talking to them about we're all one, it doesn't work. It's the wrong teaching at the wrong time. So matching is a really, really difficult thing to do. And it's only a practitioner who has walked the path and attained a degree of vision and understanding who can actually do that, and do it with responsibility. When you do that, you're taking on the responsibility for that person's happiness, that person's well-being. This is not a small thing. You know, the reason why many of our sants and swamis and sadhus don't talk very much is because they know the import of a spoken word. So it's a really important task that has to be taken on with more than just a small amount of courage. And so in our tradition, we have always protected and revered and preserved those who can tell us, actually, you're not at the stage where you think you know everything and you're right at that point. Where you are is here, and this is the practice that you should be doing. So it's vital to match the constitution with the type of teaching. And if as teachers, you're stepping in front of vulnerable, innocent students, be aware that each and every word that you share, especially as you become influential in their lives, is going to impact upon the journey of that person. And sometimes, as some of my friends will know, the right thing from a yogic perspective for a student is to tell them not to do practice, not to do yoga yet. Maybe that's not what they're supposed to be doing at that time. And it takes a person of deep learning to be able to give that guidance and support. And it also takes a person who is completely independent and doesn't give two hoots and doesn't have any needs and is not dependent upon the student to be able to say a brutal truth to the student. Which is why we have the presence of some incredible people who have that responsibility. They're not beholden to anybody. They have the ultimate freedom to be able to cause a person to reflect without being dependent upon that person's decision. As teachers, this is a responsibility. If there is a conflict between the two, the path of a yoga practitioner is a path of courage. If there is a difference between the two, a conflict between the two, the teacher is obliged to do whatever is in the student's benefit. And in that, your progress will be accelerated. If ever there's a conflict, make that choice, especially when you're new to the path. It's hard when you're desperately trying to match the cost of hiring the hall with a head count of how many students are in and turning up and so on. But that's the journey. It's not a journey for cowards. It's not a journey for fearful people. It's the ultimate test to the universe saying, here I am, I've shown up, I think I want to help and I want to get involved. Help me do what I need to do. Next practice. Right, so we've done the chest, now we're going to do the abdomen. We have the belly button here. 2 fingers above the belly button, place the left hand just slightly between the navel and this little dip here. Place the other hand on top, and it's the same movement. This time, shoulders are relaxed. That's the breathing, but we're going to do 3 in and 2 out. And be ready to rock and roll a little bit, okay? So. Please continue for a count of 15. Wonderful. Be still for a moment, keep your eyes closed, and just take your attention to the sensations in the face. Be aware of any sensations, any tingling in the lips, or any sparks flying anywhere in the cerebral hemispheres. Has the earth moved for you? I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have said that. And allow your eyes to open. So, what we've done is first the loosening practice to make the whole of the breathing apparatus nice and awake, and then we've concentrated on the chest, 45 degrees up and down. The count is 3 in, 2 out. Now we've brought it down to the abdomen. The last in this process is actually with your legs extended out in front of you. So I'm going to do that as well because I want to give you the complete sequence before I then conclude with a caveat. So if you'd like to extend your legs out in front of you, slide your hands down your shins as far as you can. Those of you who can hold your toes, hold onto your toes. If you can't, feel free to hold your shins, feel free to hold your ankles. Ideally it should be skin to skin. Okay? So if you're holding your shins, then please pull up your leggings and hold your shins skin to skin. Okay? Take your attention to your lower back. Make sure your chin is actually upwards. This will protect your lower back when you do the practice. It's the same breathing rhythm. 3 in, 2 out, only this time it's actually the chest and the lungs together. So we're inflating everything. So okay. The most important part is 3 in, 2 out. It's not so important for you to be holding your toes. Feel free to hold your shins. What will happen is that your lower back will be gently stretched. You must keep your chin upwards. Five more, please. And relax your efforts, release your toes and your legs, and just sit up with your eyes closed. Normal breaths, allow the breath to settle. What I'd like you to do now is just let the breath leave the body and stay in that empty gap before the breath starts to enter the body. So you've breathed out. The instinct to breathe in doesn't happen immediately. So just sit in that gap for a few moments. This gap is the hidden treasure in yoga practice. The point at which every muscle in the body is completely relaxed is after exhalation. Even the diaphragm underneath the lungs is relaxed in this posture. So this is the stillest state after you've exhaled and there's no breath going in. When you inhale, the body actually enters a state of tension. Very good. Now if you do the sequence of 3 that I've just shared with you, what will happen is that gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can sit in that gap for longer and longer and longer. And that gap is where meditation will occur. That gap is where tranquility will occur. That gap is where dharana, dhyan and samadhi is most easily accessed. It's the point of maximum tranquility in the body. Now those of us who are teachers and have enjoyed the company of extraordinary saints in India and extraordinary practitioners, we have the advantage of being encouraged, of being inspired, of being driven to do more practices and attain greater goals. So, about to wrap up, any questions?
Sorry, dangerous breathing exercises, the teaching of dangerous asanas.
Pranayam.
Dangerous pranayam.
Yeah,
such
yeah.
as-
Dr. John Mumford wrote a really wonderful work on this. and he said that any practice which involves breath retention for more than 5 seconds is dangerous for an Occidental practitioner, for a Western practitioner, because pranayama has a direct connection to your mental stability, and it needs to be done really slowly, otherwise you get crazy ideas coming up, you get all sorts of interesting journey potential pitfalls. I'll share with you one if I have a moment. Oh, excellent. Okay, so in terms of being in danger, there was a time when I was doing practices and I was really doing them hard and fast and furious, and I got to a particular stage where I'm not quite sure when it happened, but all of a sudden I started to accept as a reality and a truth that every young lady who was walking by and was smiling at me had some sort of intentions towards me. And I'm using my best English to make sure that I put this in the correct terminology. And it was a complete conviction that this was the case. But somewhere a little voice was saying, Satish, you're not built, you don't look, this is something not quite right here. And yet I was convinced. And I was in a perpetual state of being engaged with that energy. And I'm so grateful to my teachers and my training and my upbringing to recognize that there's something not quite right here. Otherwise I could have had a really difficult time. For the best part of 6 months I was battling with this energy, this incredible surge. And I remember in Nainital I was in a hotel, and in the middle of the night I screamed, you know, this has to stop, I don't want this anymore. And the next morning it was gone. Imagine if I hadn't had the preparation and the teaching since a tiny age that these things happen. And pranayama unlocks and releases these energies into your body, and you need to be able to contain them. We know in our tradition for a fact that many practitioners, especially in the Christian tradition, who do Gregorian chants, they sit with their knees folded, spines erect, doing Gregorian chants, and they activate energies that they can't control. They don't know how to move to the next steps and the next level. They're not prepared for it, and this is a huge, huge problem with any practitioners. So, in answer to your question, pranayama is one of the practices that you shouldn't do, and all of the texts say don't do this without the guidance of somebody who is there to pick up the pieces and who you trust. This is the biggest thing about a guru. You need somebody who is not beholden to anybody, who has sacrificed everything and says, look, I don't need anything from you, so I will take the responsibility of your well-being. Without a person of that sort, it can be challenging. It's best to stay in safe areas. So to those early teachers, those young teachers, please go slowly and don't do pranayama practices unless you know that you can handle the consequences and you're comfortable with it. Only 2 months ago I finished 7 months worth of work with a lady who had been doing her advanced teacher training on Kundalini Yoga, and her life was miserable. She really was very, very unhappy, and it took quite a bit of effort to put her back together again so she'd go back to her husband, back to her children, and continue with a normal life. So it's not so straightforward. Go slowly, take it easy. There's a huge amount of work to do, but underneath it all, we have to move our practitioners to the next level, which is solid, serious practitioners, honest practitioners, complete integrity, no rush in terms of trying to sell the stuff, but rising to the need. We're going to need all of you guys very, very soon, very quickly.
So I joined late. May you know which tradition you belong?
No, you may not. I say the joy of being a nath is that you can risk offending everybody because you don't care. No, it's not relevant and it won't do you any good. And
I would like to know which tradition you belong.
I know you would. I know you would. Gee.
So I'm teaching yoga, breathing exercises with children. Don't want to be teaching them anything.
You want to be teaching children to breathe through their noses and not their mouths. That's the biggest thing.
Right.
They have to be nose breathers. My teacher used to say, Satish, if you're going to breathe through your mouth, I want you to eat through your nose. Right? So that's how unnatural it is. It's really important. Although the oxygen distribution is not different, Pran goes through a different journey. Really important. But that's the most important thing with kids. And anything to slow the breath down. Anything which keeps the breath slow and tranquil. Children are great. They're streets ahead of most of us there. If you notice the child's breath, it's generally very tranquil and down here. हाँ जी जी
Some people set the standards. Who's going to set the standards?
look forward to it.
It's just a name and form.
We've been waiting for a long time for people to get enough of critical mass. We've got so many good practitioners now. Some of them need a bit of work, but brilliant. We really need the energy and drive that our community has, our yoga community in this country has. It just needs a bit of shaking up a little bit. It's happening. A good part of being a yoga practitioner is not necessarily just helping everything be nurtured, but it's also getting rid of dead wood and clearing the path so that what can happen does happen.
I am a yoga practitioner. Say like when you do 1.5 hour whole exercise and afterwards you do savasana, it's automatically real pranayama will happen. Now they don't teach the straight of pranayama, they do these 1.5 hours.
They're lovely guys.
Is that the way the pranayama happens?
When I started to do pranayama practice, I can hear my teacher. I went up to him all proud and said, I've been doing Hatha Yoga for 17 years and I can do this and I can do that. And he said, oh shit. He said, I'm going to have to undo all of that because your breath needs to be rebalanced. So great. Pranayama is the arresting of the movement of Pran Shakti. It is when the movement of Pran stops. And that in Shavasana is only complete when Pran movement is stopped, because then it's a corpse. So the ways of getting into that state are many and varied. And if you want to do Iyengar practices for an hour and a half, then if that's the right thing and your Guruji has said this is the suitable thing for your temperament and your constitution, brilliant.
Who's your teacher? Unless I know, yes, I can't accept your words. You don't tell me.
You see, this is how delightful it is, because I opened my talk by saying, I'm not interested in whether you believe me or not. You are free to completely dismiss it. I'm just sharing something with you, and that's the extent of it. I know. And I'm enjoying it more than you are.
Why will you not say? Why do you not say?
Okay, that's a really serious question. I'm going to give it a really serious answer. In our tradition, we have this concept of adhikar, which we've talked about in the past. And adhikar is the qualification that a person acquires to ask a question and be worthy of an answer. So there was one practice I wanted to learn. It took me 4 years, best part of 4 years, to find the teacher who was going to teach me this. And for that time, I was working in my head, what am I going to ask him? What am I going to say that he will say, yes, here's the answer. I've got to be in that position so that what I say doesn't show me to be a bumbling idiot, and that he says, no, you're not ready for it, go away. And that adhikar is really important. In our traditions, a person had to become suitable as a container to receive something that they could then be entrusted with. Now, in some traditions, we adhere to that with a degree of commitment which is almost fanatical, in that even a person, and this is a very Indian thing, even being in the presence of somebody is something that has to be earned. So I was at the Kumbh Mela in 2012 or 13, so not the last one, the one before, and we sat in a tent with some of these sadhus, and 2 members, one parliamentarian and one leading member of the press, came into the tent and wanted to sit down, and they threw them out. The guy said, get out, you have no right to even be here. They wouldn't even entertain them in that space. And so we have a real strong tradition that a person needs to be a receptacle, ready to receive something, and then they qualify to receive it. And even an answer to a question, which is why I'm not sharing it with this gentleman, and that's the only answer I can give to you. Yeah. And it's a great tradition, because like I said, the first thing you have to do is to make sure that you don't take on somebody else's burden. If I give you an answer, if I tell him, he wanders off into the cemetery at, no, I'll tell you where it was. But no.
You said
please.
there's one, as it yoga came from Bhagavad Gita, Krishna and Mahabharata. But the tradition is yoga came from Lord Shiva.
Yes, I'm inclined to agree with that. And?
Sorry.
Yes. Sorry, was there a question mark at the end of it?
No, but your view is
yoga came from Lord Krishna to Arjuna, but the tradition is Lord Shiva taught 8 disciples, including Patanjali.
You're on very dangerous ground here. At the end of every chapter in the Gita, there is a statement. It says, "This is the dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna. This is the dialogue on Brahma Vidya. This is a Yoga Shastra." It says that at the end of every chapter.
Them is Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. The Ashtanga Yoga came from Lord
Gee, I think you're digging now, and I'm one of those ruthless people who will take great delight in digging even further. I don't think you're going in the right place. If you want to have a private conversation and not waste everybody's time or take it into space which is quite uncomfortable for many people, then I think you should ask me
So I can
alone.
tell you afterwards.
Maybe. But thank you. Andy,
I've got a question.
are you all frightened to ask questions now?